is good. Rail is bad. This concludes my prepared remarks. I'll be happy to take any questions. This, of course, is a rather gross oversimplification. Bus or rail, by in and of itself, are neither good or bad. These are tools. It is how they are used. It is how they are applied that's important. There are times when rail can be a very good transit system. There are other times it can be a very bad transit system. Like any tool, the key is knowing which tool to use and how to use it. A hammer is a very good tool for driving in nails. If you are trying to insert screws, a hammer does not work very well. And when the only tool you have is a hammer, after a while, all your problems begin to look a lot like nails. Well, Mr. O'Toole put out a little report, and we have the Center for Transportation Excellence, which didn't really like it all that much, and so this was a response to something that he said. And they took exception, as he pointed out, to his data on fatalities in Denver. And I particularly like the statistic he had, which was he used per billion passenger miles, because he needed to come up with a ratio. And they say, well, this is obviously wrong. They haven't traveled a billion passenger miles. It's called a ratio. Do you have anybody there who finished high school? And then they talk about it's this, that, and the other thing, and why are you counting this, and why are you counting that? Look, folks, this is the federal standard. This is what they have said for everyone to include. And everybody had their fatalities included. Everybody had their drunks included. You are in the same measurement metric as everybody else. It's not a problem with the metric. If you aren't tall enough for the basketball team, then the solution is not to get a ruler that doesn't measure well. Okay, this is one of my favorites, and it's not just the CFTE, the Center for Transportation Excrement, that has made this fight. And pick your number. I have seen 6 lanes, I have seen 7, I have seen 12. Now, if you read this very closely, you'll see it doesn't quite mean what it says, what it first appears to say. It says that one light rail is equal to 12 lanes. However, looking at it a little bit closer, you see that they're talking bi-directional for the train. So it's really saying a light rail train in a line in one direction is worth 6 lanes. So that's what we're really looking at. Now, there are some very good metrics on this that, of course, the light rail proponents have been ignoring for years. And there's 2 key statistics that are used. And let's just go through the calculation because they are intermixed. The first metric is passengers past a point. And it's very simple. It's trains per hour times cars per train times passengers per car equals passengers past a point during an hour. Now, if you then multiply that times speed, you get what is passenger miles, which is transportation work for people. If you're moving freight, then it's ton miles, which is a very similar calculation. Pretty basic. This is Transportation Engineering 101. Now, if you want to play games with statistics, and you want to make your mode look better, this is fairly easy to do. It's how to apply this and mix it up in a way so you come out looking better. Now, if you, starting with location, if you're starting with road, you want to make it look better, you take the entire metro area length, and I'll have a graph in a moment that will help you understand that. Rail, you concentrate on the peak load point, the point in the rail line where you have the maximum ridership. Time on a road, you go all day. And on rail, you go peak hour. Why? Because by time of day, roads tend to be far more even than does rail, which tends to be very peak oriented. The metric, road, you want to use transportation work because the speed is important. Where rail, they generally use passengers past a point, which ignores speed and has some deficiencies in my opinion. Methodology, road, actual. You want to compare actual. You want to go out and get data for lines that actually exist, for roads that actually exist. Rail uses theoretical. And they use theoretical for rail, but as in the example I just gave you, they compare it to actual for roads. And of course, you include freight if you want to make roads look better. You exclude freight if you want to make rail look better. Now, all of these statistics have some use. That is, with the possible exception of this one. They have some use if you have a purpose. They can be useful, but you have to use the right one in the right place. Now, this is a piece done by Jim McIsaac, who has been very active in Seattle, and this is a wonderful piece. What he did is he had compared the projections for Central Link, which is probably going to be the heaviest capacity light rail line around. It will run 4-car trains, supposedly at a very short headway. And he compared it to I-5 as it actually exists, which by some strange coincidence happens to be about 12 lanes in part of the area it covers, particularly the key area. So what you see here, that is the actual number of vehicles multiplied by the average occupancy per vehicle, calculated in an extremely time-consuming manner for every on and off ramp on the freeway. That's what he did to put that together. Now you see a couple of things. First of all, the roads are fairly constant. There is a peak there, but there is your base out at the fringes. And so the peak is only about that much. And of course, the use extends pretty far out into the suburban, even the rural areas. Then you look at the first part of light rail, and then even the second part of light rail. Of course, it doesn't cover as far, it doesn't go as far. You're missing that much on each side. Now, of course, when you start light rail, at the initial station, you generally have a very low load, which builds up to a peak. And so your peak to average tends to be far higher with light rail and really virtually all modes of transit. The ones that have the least effect like that are commuter rail and long-haul commuter express bus. So I wanted to show you that so you have a better understanding of how some of these comparisons are made. Now I'm going to give you some actual statistics. Now this is directly from the article I quoted at the beginning. So we have 2,000 cars an hour times that occupancy. There's your light rail statistics, etc. Okay, now let me start with a couple things. You, sir, I see you have a huge amount of transportation and light rail expertise. Could you please give me a complete list of every light rail line in North America that runs 6-car train? Thank you, absolutely correct. You, sir, another obvious expert, could you please give me a complete list of all the light rail lines in North America that run 5-car light rail trains? None. Absolutely correct. Another obvious expert. And how many light rail lines in North America run 3-minute headways? 0. Thank you. How many light rail lines run 4-minute headway?
Beats me, but I'm sure it's a small number.
Very small. About as low as you can get in absolute value. This doesn't exist. This doesn't exist anywhere in the U.S. on a single light rail line. The longest light rail lines that have been operated recently in the U.S. are in Sacramento, which has run 4-car trains. The reason they run 4-car trains is the line was originally designed for single track, and as a result, you can't run trains in both directions, so they were limited to about a 15-minute headway. So they would run 4 trains an hour with 4 trains, with 4 cars per train. 16 cars an hour, absolute max, is what they got out of it. And they have spent better part of 20 years trying to double track so they can stop doing that. They can have shorter headways. 3-car trains are somewhat common. Not hugely common, but they are certainly not unknown. About 5-minute headways, 12 trains an hour is about as low as it gets in the transit industry for a single light rail line. Now, important qualification. There are 3 places in the United States, they are in Boston, San Francisco, and Philadelphia, where you have a number of light rail lines that combine on a single track and run as a subway through the downtown. I am not talking about these. This is not what most people are talking about when they talk about light rail. These are subways, they are underground, they cost a hell of a lot of money. This isn't what most people are talking about when they talk about light rail. Okay, now I'm going to make some adjustments and to what they have talked about for freeway lanes. They said 2,000. Frankly, I don't think you can really operate at level of service E with 2,000. There are some roads where that's possible. That's pretty rare. 1,700 is fairly safe. Now, the values I'm going to give you are either specific to an agency that is representative, or they are generally representative. You can quibble about some of the numbers and add 10% or subtract 20%, and I'm not going to argue too much. I can certainly find examples. Level of service F will vary. It can start as low as about 1,700 or 1,800. The highest value I've ever seen is about 2,650. The speeds, well, the occupancy, I took a typical, and I deliberately went a little bit on the low for rush hour. Non-rush hour, it goes up. When you get the soccer moms going during the middle of the day and things like that, getting up to 1.4, 1.5, even a little bit higher is more the norm. But during the peak, on a general purpose freeway lane, that's probably in the range, again, a little on the low side. The speeds, again, you can quibble with. LOSE, as a general rule, level of service E, and these are the standards that have been promulgated by the Institute of Transportation Engineers, ITE, in the Highway Capacity Manual, which is a little bit out of date, in my opinion. The general rule is every time you go down from A, which sort of means you're the only person on the freeway, to B, then C, then D, then E, you lose about 5% of the speed from the free flow speed. Free flow speed and the posted speed limit generally don't have a hell of a lot of common in this country, as some of you anybody in this country ever driven on a freeway? Okay. And I don't think I have to say more. So I'm saying 55 at level of service E. I'm using 25 for LOS F. You can question both of them, but I think they're representative. Okay. I'm now going to go to the Los Angeles Blue Line, which I picked specifically because it is the heaviest utilized light rail line in the nation. And I have done this 2 ways. These are both during peak hour, but one is at the peak load point, and the other takes the average for the entire trip from end to end during the peak period. Now, at the bottom, you have the calculation of transportation work, which is passenger miles in an hour, which is a somewhat phony number because nobody's riding it for an hour and the track ain't long enough to ride it for an hour for most people. But it's useful for these purposes. And then I have done 2 indexes. And the index is what you should key on. And I've done one index where E is 1.00 and another one where F is 1.00. So look at the values here. That's what's important. This is the heaviest light rail line in the U.S. in terms of passenger use. And I'd like to take a good part of the credit for that, which I will share with someone else who deserves a big part of the credit. We have on the podium up there the gentleman who put in Proposition A, the first Los Angeles sales tax in 1980, the requirement that 35% of it be spent only on rail. And let's give Wendell a big hand for that. And I was the one who came up with the brilliant idea of having a flat fare rather than a zone fare that went up by tripling because the damn ticket machines they bought didn't work. Okay. They run trains on 5-minute headways. So that's 12 trains an hour. You're wondering, how do you get to 2.5? Well, they alternate 2-car and 3-car trains, and if you're interested why, see me later. It's an operational restriction. So you've got 30 an hour, and on the occupancy, past the peak load point, the blue line has one of the heaviest in the U.S. because it is very heavily utilized. 1, because it's fast, and 2, because it's cheap. So 150, which is a 200% standing load. There's about 75 seats. There's about an equal number of people standing at the peak load point on average. But over the entire trip, the average is a lot lower. And I've had to come up with these through my own experience and using other data, etc., and my own rides. I believe they are in the ballpark, but they are not official numbers. Then we get the speed. Well, past the peak load point, the blue line is doing 15 miles an hour. It is on surface streets. It is not going much faster than the surface traffic, even though it has exclusive lanes. The overall end-to-end is 24. So you take the numbers in terms of transportation work and you see the indices. And on one of these, the blue line exceeds 1 lane. 1 freeway lane compared to an F freeway. This is about the only time I have seen, using any methodology at all, and using everything to favor light rail, I have ever seen a light rail line actually exceed 1 freeway lane. Typically, your numbers are more in the 0.2, 0.3, occasionally some others in the 0.5. Now I'm going to do some busways. Now, the El Monte busway travels into downtown LA from the east side. It's about 12 miles long. It is a busway / HOV lane. It's HOV 3. You have to have 3 people in your car, or 2 people in a 2-seater, or on a motorcycle, or you have a real good story, or you're a pregnant woman, and never mind. Okay. Here we have a good HOV lane. There are bad ones, but there are real good ones. This one has over 1,200 vehicles an hour. With the buses, about 80 of those total vehicles are buses, and they average well over 30. Your average occupancy is pretty high, so as a result, you get a lot of people past a point. More than the blue line. Interesting. Plus, the speed. End-to-end speed in this case is significantly higher. So in terms of transportation work, this is producing quite a bit. And out in the peak period, this 1 lane is creating more transportation work than the 4 general purpose lanes in that freeway combined. And then finally, you remember that 30,000 they got by doubling the 15? Well, no light rail line has ever come close to that. But guess what? A freeway lane. And these are actual numbers. This is the approach to the Port Authority bus terminal in Manhattan through the Lincoln Tunnel. They have a dedicated lane for the buses. They have these are a series of studies from 72 into the 90s. And these are consistently the range they have had for about 30 years. Over 700 buses with over 40 people and moving 27 to 35,000 people past a point. Unfortunately, I don't have a speed to give you, but I will tell you that it's moving a lot faster than light rail. So the answer is, can a freeway lane move more than a light rail lane? You know, I think in some cases it can. This is the Proposition A. Thank you, but I don't need sympathy laughter. Okay. This is the Proposition A rail map that was presented to the voters in 1980. Give us a half-cent sales tax, and we will build these 11 rail lines. And don't try to count it. It makes no sense. I can explain it if you're real interested. Now, it is now 2004, some of you may have noticed. The tax was doubled to a full cent in the year 1990. And after actually 22 years of having the tax, that's what's been built. We have got the red line that's going to the valley. We have got the blue line going to Long Beach, and we have the green line, and just within the last year, the Pasadena line, the gold line, has opened. That's what we got. Most of the other lines are not even in planning. Now, we have also had a wonderful job of cost estimation. John Richmond, bless him, did his PhD dissertation on this, and he tracked very carefully the cost estimates. This is for me. The first informal estimate was $125 million to build it. First published, 146. It went up, it went up, it went up. When they did the EIR, the Environmental Impact Report, which is the California state version of an EIS under federal rules, as close as I could figure out, because they didn't build anything in the EIR, it was $399 million is the estimate. And as you can see, it just kept going. Now, the latest MTA number that they say that it's going to come out is about $860 million. And they're fairly confident of this because it opened in 1990, and this year they are hoping that they will be able to close out the last outstanding contract disputes. And so they're pretty confident of that number. I kept track of the numbers. That's where it is, and then some. That's 21.6 miles. Okay, now let's do another one. They're also real good on ridership. This is the red line. The original estimate done in 93, which was the number that was used to sell it to everybody, was 376,000 a day ridership. 83, thank you, sorry. In 89, after a lot of crazy reasons, they had to reroute it a little bit. The estimate change was 298,000 a day, and that's exactly what they built. Then they opened the second to last segment of the line, and then as they were preparing to open it, they put out an estimate for 125. All three estimates were for the year 2000. A little bit of a discount. They actually got 60,000. They were saying 80,000 on the second to last line plus 45,000 on the last segment for a total of 125. So they missed the 80,000 by 20,000. So then they put an estimate out for the full line of 100,000, adding 40 to the 60 they already had. But only if all of the bus lines were canceled. So they canceled the bus lines and they changed their estimate to 80,000 just before opening. So then they opened and they reported 116,000. What a success. We beat what we were expecting. The next year, it went up to 132,000. And the next year, it went down to 95,000 when they rather sheepishly told everybody that they had screwed up their passenger counting methodology and they really didn't have as many people as they said, right? Your tax dollars at play. This is the logo for the MTA. We had a little contest before the merger. This won the grand prize. Anybody get it? Okay, the MTA. Okay. I didn't get it either. Don't feel embarrassed. Now, one second.
No.
Okay, that's where you get left. Now, after Prop A was passed in 80, we lowered the bus fares from 85 cents to 50 cents for a 3-year period. Bus ridership went up 80%, reached its all-time high. Nothing in the history of transit in the U.S. post-World War II, anything remotely close to it. We added almost no bus service. The buses were incredibly crowded, but the people, you couldn't beat them off with a stick. You could pass them by because there was no room, but people loved it. We got up to almost 500 million riders in that year. Then, of course, well, that worked pretty well, so let's cancel that and try something else. Let's build rail. So over the next 11 years, till 1996, LA got into a rail building race, and the total ridership, unlinked passenger trips went from 497 to 364. And that is total, including bus and rail. So we decided, a bunch of people in town decided, what can we do to improve this? Well, sue the damn bastards. And we did. And we won a consent decree that forced MTA to lower the fares, to add bus service on their incredibly overcrowded bus routes, and to add a few new bus lines. And what you see, take a guess what year the consent decree went into effect. Now, does anybody see something of a trend? And I ask you, who is anti-transit? In the 11 years before, we were losing over 12 million riders a year for 11 years. And the 6 years after, we added over 13 million a year. The second biggest transit system in Los Angeles County is Long Beach Transit, which carries a little under 26 million a year. We added a Long Beach Transit every year for 6 years through the consent decree. Which, of course, MTA didn't like, because it kept them away from all their transit improvements. Now, they have 4 urban rail systems. The blue line, that's the one to Long Beach, and that has very high ridership, very low fare box recovery, but very high ridership. So it's only about $10.45 subsidy, $11.13 cost. This is after backing out the fares and a few other things that are subsidy per trip. This is per new passenger, The gold line, this is the one that just opened. I keep saying it's early, ridership will pick up, the number will go down. Could happen, I guess, hasn't yet, but we'll see. The green line opened in '95, $16. The red line, $23, $24. Rail average, almost $20 per new trip. The consent decree, public sector subsidy, capital and operating, after the increased fares, $1.04. Now, the result of this is obvious, of course. MTA has been fighting the consent decree as hard as it possibly can. After they signed it, after they voluntarily signed it, they have been fighting to get out of it. They went all the way to the United States Supreme Court and lost 7 times in a row. And they still aren't done. By the way, that $1.04 before, I was using MTA cost numbers, which in my opinion may be just a little bit overstated. And I'll just end with a quote from the mayor of Los Angeles, and at the time, the chair of the MTA, Richard Rubin. "We wish we had never started the whole thing. Fixed rail is not the answer to the transportation needs of our city. We should stop all this insanity that has gone on these past years."